Hi, everyone. How are you? Awesome. How's your SIGGRAPH going? Woo! There we go. There's some energy in this room. Who had more than one drink ticket last night? Oh, yeah, there we go. Well, first off, I want to thank you all for coming back. We had a little snafu this morning. I'm so happy that you're all here with me today to talk about Houdini concepts for the Maya artist. So just a show of hands, how many of you are, this is probably a dumb question to begin with, but wait, I'll work it out. How many of you are Maya efficient? Would you consider yourselves Maya efficient, right? So how many people have been using Maya for more than 5 years? How many people have been using Maya for more than 10 years? 20s? Not quite? Okay, all right. 97-ish? That's solid, yeah. So I first started using 3D Studio Max and Maya Autodesk products back, I guess 98, 2000, somewhere in that era. And I had no idea what the idea of proceduralism was or how it could benefit me or what Houdini was or any of that stuff. And the first time that I saw what Houdini was doing, I was in grad school and I thought to myself, that's awesome, I want to do that. And then I opened up the interface and I was like, I don't want to do that. There's no way I'm going to do that. There's no way I'm going to be able to figure that stuff out. It's crazy town. I just want to make my stuff and move on. But I had a wonderful professor that actually kind of coached me through some of the basic ideas that we're going to cover today, which is sort of how geometry is just geometry, right? Points are points. Faces are faces, and if you know how to manipulate them in one way, you actually already know how to manipulate them in another way. It's just a matter of taking the skill set that you have and translating it into a new way of thinking. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about. We're going to do some one-to-one comparisons of actual interface elements in Maya and how they translate directly to the interface elements into Houdini. So some of that very basic level stuff. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the actual ideas of building what it is that you're building and what it is that you're creating in one package versus the other. And for that, we're going to do a little bit of a live Houdini demo, but when we get into that, don't be as concerned about what buttons is he pushing, what nodes is he laying down, and what are the exact settings. Think about it more as how am I working through this problem in this software as opposed to how I would in another software. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So first off, I just want to introduce myself and my team just for a brief minute. I work on the education team, so I work directly with colleges and universities to help them develop curriculum to promote Houdini education in schools. So if anybody is from a college or university, or if you have any questions about the school that you may be attending and how we can help them get Houdini going, please let me know. I've got business cards up here. We can definitely talk and move forward. This is my wonderful, wonderful boss, Julie Lottering. She handles more high-level things like school certification and whatnot. This is me. I'm the idiot with the green background. I used to work at Pluralsight for a while. I used to work at Digital Tutors before that, and Effects PhD before that. And before that, did a bunch of broadcast stuff and on-air graphics and all kinds of different things, mainly in 3D Studio Max and Maya. My Houdini training didn't start till way after that. And this is our support team. Anytime you have any issues with Houdini, if you're downloading Apprentice and working, we have a free version of Houdini that you can start to explore the concepts we're going to learn. If you have any issues with that, feel free to contact support. Now, let's talk more about exactly what we're going to talk about today. So first off, I want to talk about menu sets. Oh, am I not loud enough? I can be louder. Oh, yeah, rock on. Is this going to allow me to jump back out and in and out of software at the same time? Uh-oh. Oh, gotcha. So we're going to talk about menu sets and contexts. So again, this is some of that one-to-one idea of how Maya handles working through data and working in the interface, and how Houdini handles working with data and working through the interface. We're going to talk about tools versus nodes as well. So one of the things you'll notice in Maya is that you have all of these things up there, and you click them, and they do something, and that's what we call tools. Like you use the polygon mesh or polyextrude tool or the chamfer tool, right? It's how you talk about it. In Houdini, we talk about that a little bit differently. We use nodes and node networks, but you'll notice in some of the examples that I'm going to give you, they're one-to-one correlations. It's very much the same concept with a little bit different GUI, and that's it. Also, it's very important that we talk about attributes versus parameters, okay? So some of the way that Maya handles manipulating geometry in the attribute editor, that knowledge set of thinking about changing attributes to modify geometry is a little bit different in the way that Houdini handles it. So we're going to kind of do some translation between what attributes are and what parameters are. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about the idea of construction versus proceduralism, which is the whole concept of building one thing or building a thing that makes those things, okay? Which is a little bit different way of approaching the problem. So one of the biggest obstacles that we find when we're working with schools or with teachers that are trying to teach Houdini is that people say it's hard, it's difficult, Houdini is hard. And it's not so much that Houdini is hard as much as it is you already have an established way of thinking that you have with Maya, and you have to unlearn your Maya in order to learn the Houdini part. So it's not that it's hard, but it's painful. There's a second step of having to sort of stop thinking about things this way and totally rethink the way that I'm approaching this. And it doesn't have to involve a lot of code and a lot of math. People have a misunderstanding that Houdini is vector math in a box, and you have to know all of the geometric equations in vector math, and I need to know linear algebra before I can do anything in Houdini, and it's not true. It's not true at all. Understanding some basics about programming constructs, and by that I just mean, what is an if-then statement? I mean basics. What is a for each, right? Basic knowledge. Not even like how you code it and what the parameters are or what the syntax is. Just those concepts of how you think about logic and processing information. That little shift is enough to get your feet wet and get you in doing some really cool stuff inside of Houdini. So one thing that you probably have heard people that talk about Houdini use this really weird way of speaking, where they talk about shops, vops, cops, rops, stops, and all that stuff, and people are always like, what the hell is that? What does any of that stuff mean? Well, really all they are, we call them operators. So in Maya, you have, like I said, a tool, a poly-extrude tool, okay? The way that the Houdini was developed, the language, again, this is just nomenclature. This is just words that we use. It's not even hard. It's just the idea that we call them operators. Those operators are segmented into specific sets of things, okay? So you have surface operators where you do modeling. That's SOPs, S-O-P-S, right? ROPs, rendering operators, okay? So when you hear all that term, don't even think about the op piece of it. Really just think about the first letter that you hear, right? Hey, I'm working in pops, P, particles. He's working in particles, right? So it's very simply just whatever that first letter is pretty much translates into whatever that context is going to be. Now, a little bit bigger concept, what are contexts? Contexts are simply groups of tools. So we call them contexts. In Maya, you call them menu sets, right? It's a very similar concept. I want to work with modeling. You go to the modeling tool set. There, your shelf changes and everything in your workspace, the tools that are available to you, the menus and everything else are geared around modeling things. Same thing as working in the SOP context would be selecting the modeling shelf from the menu set, okay? So don't, again, it's just a matter of one-to-one correlations. There's nothing real complicated here. It's just now that I know, I can easily translate into that work style. So if you want to work in animation, you go to chops. If you want to work in rendering, you go to ROPs, right? I believe it's true to say that these presentations are being recorded. Also, if you need any of this information, like these slides or anything that's going like this as a reference, just let me know. I'll have business cards up here, and I'm happy to get you all that information so that you have it. So, contexts and menu sets, okay? Cool, we've got that down. So, Houdini works like an operating system, okay? Maya works sort of like an index of a book. Okay? When you think about the idea of the outliner inside of Maya being your guide to the scene, right? It's a hierarchical graph of everything that's in your scene, right? It's a collection of data, of processes that are stacked hierarchically inside the outliner. Well, Houdini handles that a little less like a book and more like an actual operating system, like an OS. So to show you that, I'm actually, ooh, whoa, go back. There we go. I'm going to jump over in Houdini and we'll actually start looking at some of this. So again, don't worry so much about these nodes and what they're doing and anything. This is just about a visual demonstration. So if I'm over here in Windows and I want to go to a certain piece of data, like a certain file that I want to get to, I can dive into these individual folders and keep digging till I get to where I want to go. Up at the top here, I have this path that shows me exactly where I am, okay? If I want to go up one level to the folder above it, I can click this button and I go up one level. If I want to go back to where I was, I can go back, right? I don't want to, I'm sure you guys know how to use an operating system, right? Well, that means that you already know how to navigate around and get around inside of Houdini as well. So in Houdini, we have these address bars that are right up here. This will tell you where you are in the overall network or the overall operating system, geometric operating system that is Houdini. If I want to dive inside here and see what's in here, I dive inside and look at my address bar. My address bar now gives me the exact path to the data that I want to manipulate. In fact, if you're familiar with Linux or Unix or the command shell and you use a lot of lines of .. // to get around and navigate inside of Windows or Unix or whatever, you can easily come in here and edit path as text, and I can just type in the path of where I want to go, and I go directly to it. Okay? So let's say I dive inside this network, and then I dive inside this one, and now I'm buried in here somewhere, and I need to get back up to the top really quickly. Well, same as you can do in Windows, this is the layout. So if I want to go back to the top, I just click the first folder, and it takes me back to the root, if you will. So this is like my computer, okay? So we earlier talked about contexts and menu sets and being able to isolate the workflow to get to the tools that we need. So when you click on this, you see here you can access all the different contexts of Houdini. So instead of being a menu shelf up here on the top right-hand side that isolates a giant collection of menus across the top of the interface, we're working right within our geometric operating system. And if we want to start working on rendering, then we can go over to the rendering area and start working on that. If we want to work in compositing, we can come over and start working in compositing. I like to think of these areas, these contexts, within the scope of the operating system in the same way that you would think about hard drives. So you have your PC, and if you want to work on documents, you go into My Documents, and you start working on your documents. If you want to listen to music, you go into Music, and you start working on music, right? So the same idea, correlation of navigating data based off of what it is that you want to work on, okay? So Houdini is just an operating system for geometry. You have the same navigational controls. I can click the back button and go back. I can go up one level, I can go down one level, or I can go into a subfolder. Think about it that way, okay? Oh, it's not all fancy and big. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the network editor. The next big thing that people usually freak out about when they jump inside of Houdini is what is this node-based thing with all these wires and these little dots and boxes over here in this node editor? Now recently, Autodesk has released a node editor inside of Maya so that you can actually visualize your data in a very similar fashion so that you see little boxes of things that are plugged into other little boxes of things that do stuff, right? The node editor inside of Houdini works from top to bottom as opposed to left to right. No big deal, we can get over that fairly easily. But the biggest change or difference between the two is that when you're working in Maya and you're looking at the node editor, each of those nodes holds the new data that it has and the data from before. We call that history in Maya, right? So I have a sphere, and I make an extrude to it, and then I do a little chamfer up here, and then I add UVs to it, and then I add a texture to it. Well, the original geometry node is here. The next node that does your poly extrude has the original poly and the poly extrude data. The next node that you have has the chamfer data, the poly extrude data, and the original sphere data. So as you build those up, what happens? Everything slows down, right? You're told right off the bat, delete history as much as you can and as soon as possible so you can keep a steady workflow going that's efficient for what you need. Problem with that is that it limits you in what you can go back and do. You model something to a certain point, you delete the history, and then you decide you want to change the depth of the extrude. You can't, it's gone. You have now cut off all of that history and you have a new piece of geometry, right? So I make a change to it and there it is. It's new and it's done. The way that Houdini handles information is you start with a sphere, which is just a collection of points in space. Each one of those points has a position in X, Y, Z. If you want to change some information about those points, the next node in the list, i.e. the transform here in this example, all it does is modify the data on the old set and it doesn't carry it through to the next node. So it doesn't complicate or get heavier and heavier and heavier the more nodes you add. The nodes are simply little computers that are doing a manipulation to the data in some way. And that's it. It doesn't necessarily need to reference the new data. It's just changing what's there and sending it down the pipe. I'll show you this as an example, an actual example here in just a second. So nodes are visualized, operators are visualized as networks, right? When you work in Maya and you add the polyextrude and you add the chamfer, in the attribute editor, you get these little tabs that start to form over on the right. And if you do a lot of complex processes, before you know it, you have this gigantic collection of tabs. And each one of those little tabs is representing a different operation that's full of things that you can change about that operation. Well, in Houdini, instead of little tabs, we have these little boxes, okay, that are operators or nodes. So if I want to edit what's happening on this particular node, this height field node, I simply select it, and the parameter view, which is above me, changes to show me, just like the attribute editor would in Maya, all of the data that relates to what's happening in that operation. Okay? If I was in Maya, I would simply be looking up here for the next tab that leads me into the next process of what I'm doing. Well, that's visualized in Houdini as simply being a little link that leads you to the next node, and as soon as I click on that node, now I have the parameters for that operation. Okay? So instead of tabs across an interface, we're looking at nodes in a network. No biggie, right? We can figure that out. That's easy to get around. Now I know if I want to change any of these things, I just go to that thing, and there's all of the things, the attributes related to that particular thing. Oh, it starts over every time. I'm bad at PowerPoint, clearly. So we need to talk about the difference between attributes and parameters, all right? In Maya, when you want to edit something, you go to the attribute editor and you change an attribute, right? What is an attribute? Anybody have an idea of how you would define that in Maya? Like how would you define, and there's no wrong answer here, I'm just curious, how would you define an attribute in Maya? What does that mean? Yes? A variable attached to an object. That's an awesome, awesome way to think about it. Anyone else have any?
Numerical description.
A numerical description of something, right.
Length, breadth, height, for example.
There you go, there you go. So what is a parameter in Maya? Right. Okay, so it's a language barrier. Again, we're talking about nomenclature here. You already have the concept of what an attribute is, and you're correct. So let's think about this for a second. In Maya, you have an attribute editor where you change data of that thing, whatever that thing might be. If it's a sphere or an extrude or whatever it might be, you come in here and you make a change, and it changes what's happening in the viewport, right? In Houdini, attributes are adjectives. So think about it very similarly. You say, what was a variable that has data? A variable attached to an object. So in Houdini, you would think about that more along the lines of something that describes something else, okay? Just like you would an adjective in the English language, right? I have a cup of coffee. My coffee is hot. Hot? Hot is an attribute, right? It's an attribute of my coffee. So in the silly little slide, it's ice cream, but it does take us through a little bit better explanation. So if I have a dessert, right, I have this overall thing that's a dessert, and I can use a couple of different things to describe that dessert. I can say this dessert has a flavor, and the flavor is sweet. It has a caloric count, and it's really high. It's got 8,000 calories in it, okay? So the attributes of this ice cream are flavor and calories. The data attached to them are sweet and 8,000. That piece of data is attached to the overall object of the dessert, right? However, each part of the dessert can have its own set of attributes, right? In the real world, it's the same way. So the cookies up top may be really, really crisp and crunchy, while the ice cream is very cold and melty or cold and gooey, right? So the overall thing can have a certain way of describing it, and then each little element inside of it can have ways of describing those elements as well. So if we think about it that way, and we know that Houdini is basically just a data manipulator, right? Where it's a geometry operating system where we're editing geometry. Let's make a single point. Boop. And you do have to make those noises, by the way. That's a requirement. Beep, boop. Okay, so let's take this and make this as Maya as humanly possible. okay? So here's sort of your outliner over here, all right? I'd call it the tree view, but you can get around the exact same way, right? You can click on the individual objects that you want, and there's even a way inside of Maya that you can view your shape nodes inside of the outliner. Very much the same thing here. I can twirl this down, and I can look at the individual nodes. It'll take me to that part of the network, but you're not seeing that right now because I've hidden the network editor. But this is a very Maya-esque experience right now, okay? So I'm just clicking around on the things that I want. Here's my one single point right here. Now, in the background, all of those attributes that we're talking about, these pieces of information, this location right here of the point, 0, 0, 0 in 3D space, actually exist in something called the geometry spreadsheet. So I'm just going to split this in half, top, bottom, just a little interface trick. And I'm going to show the geometry spreadsheet. So this is how we think about data inside of Houdini. It's not necessarily just parameters where we're changing something and it's happening. When we change something over here, what we're actually doing is modifying those attributes, okay? So my dessert was sweet. I could say I want a, instead of a sweet dessert, that I might want an alcoholic dessert, right? So imagine that I had a drop down where I could switch from ice cream to brandy, okay? So all we're doing there is we're changing the attribute of the dessert to make it a little bit different. So the same concept applies here. We can see we have a single point. Okay, that point is point number 0, shown here in the geometry spreadsheet, which works very much like an Excel spreadsheet. It's just a list of the attributes on that thing. For our ice cream, we had clearness and opacity to describe the glass. We have size and crunch factor to describe the nuts or the cookies or whatever it is. Well, right now, we have one point, and the only thing we're describing that point with is its position, X, Y, Z, right? Now, you may say, well, right here, yeah, it's X, Y, Z. It's the same thing. Why do I need to look at this? And the reason is because this area of the parameters view on the right-hand side of the interface, all it is doing is modifying the attribute. So when I actually type 0.5 here, and we move that 0.5 degrees in X, down the X-axis, all this is a reflection of the actual attribute data that exists on the point, okay? So that individual point is carrying with it a particular position data. I use my parameter editor, right, to change the attributes that exist on that piece of geometry. Now I'm going to expose the network view again. So we say here's our one point. I added one point. Now the thing about the way Houdini works is I can make custom attributes and add those attributes to any type of piece of geometry that I want. For instance, what if I want a red point in the middle of my scene, right? Well, I can come in here and I can add a color node. This is very much a top-level thing that you could do in Maya. You could add color to an object. However, as soon as I add that color, look at what's happened inside of my attribute editor. I've added a new attribute onto that point, right? That attribute is CD. CD is color in RGB, and the R value has a value of 0.9. So instead of just laying down paint or painting an object red, and now I know it's red and I move on and do something else with it, Houdini exposes that little layer underneath that says, hey, what you're actually doing is adding an attribute on top of this point. You're just adding data to the point, and you're manipulating that data to do whatever you want to with it, right? So I'm going to stop there for a second because there's a lot of people kind of staring at me going, what the hell is he talking about? So does anybody have any questions up to this point as to how data works back and forth? Yes, sir?
Do you have the ability to change that name there, the scene name?
I sure can. In fact, I can make brand new ones that don't have anything to do with anything. So I could do a attribute create node, okay? So here's my original point. I'm adding attributes here that are color that make it whatever it is. Now I can plug this guy in here, and I can add a new one called dolphin. And dolphin has a value of 55. Okay. Oh, the default value is 55. Current value 55. If you look in your geometry spreadsheet down here, I now have a new attribute called dolphin with a value of 55. And you're like, well, why in the world would I want to do that? Well, does that even have anything to do with anything, right? You can use those attributes, and here's where we kind of get into the idea of proceduralism. So we'll get to why you would do that in just 1 second, and we'll talk about that very, very clearly. So what is this crazy word that we always hear called proceduralism, right? How do I use proceduralism in Houdini versus how I might use it or try to use it inside of Maya, okay? Proceduralism is the idea of building a machine versus the idea of building a one tool, okay? If I was a stone carver or a wood carver, I might have a chisel, and I could use that chisel to start with a chunk of wood, and I could tear off a certain piece and do that 2 or 3 times and whittle that down until it actually makes a shape that I want it to make, right? But once I've cut that wood off of that chunk and I've shaved it away, it's gone. I mean, I could glue it back on if I want, right? Or because we're in computer land, thank God, you can do Control-Z and get it back. But the idea is I have permanently modified that piece of wood, okay? And I can make it look like how I want one time, and I get that one thing, and that's awesome. I have a thing. But what if you need 100 things? Or what if you need 10 things that all look like they were made by the same person, the same whittler, the same artisan, but I need a collection of artwork instead of just one piece from that one artist? This is where Houdini steps up and really becomes a powerful tool. Houdini becomes the machine that makes the widgets as opposed to the one person that carves out one widget. So proceduralism, think of proceduralism as a machine that has inputs that makes something. And if I change some of those inputs, I get a different thing out of the machine, right? So let's talk about how we can use attributes to create proceduralism. So if I wanted to build a rock, I'm just going to get rid of this guy here. Whoop. Pardon me. Again, a noise that means undo. So I have a sphere. Close this guy here for a second. There's my sphere. And I'm going to turn on wire shaded view so we can see the smooth shaded, so we can see our polys and whatnot. So I'm going to make sure this is a polygon to begin with. Okay? I have all of my points out there. And I decided I wanted a little more resolution, so I'm going to make some more polys out there. So now I have this nice little sphere. And I want to add a couple of layers of noise. And all I'm doing here is modeling, right? You have the same ability to do something very, very similar inside of Maya. I can push points around, right? No big deal there. So I'm going to use this mountain node. A mountain node is just the way that we call noise because it looks like a mountain when you add it to a plane, okay? I'm going to select a certain type of noise and change 1 or 2 of the attributes that drive the point position on that sphere. So now I have a rock, and this is fabulous. And if you were working in a linear package, a non-procedural package, and you needed to make 100 rocks, you might save this rock out, then come in here and make a change. In our case of our noise, we'll just change the time. You can see that sort of offsets the noise on the rock. So now I've got a little bit different looking rock, and I could save that one out. And I could change this time again, and I could save another one out. And I could eventually get a collection of a bunch of rocks that look like they all broke off of the same mountain, okay? But what you're actually doing is just manipulating the geometry, then locking it down and shoving it out. I made a widget. Now I have to go back and make another widget by hand if I want another widget, right? So how do we build a machine that makes widgets? Well, let's think about this. If I want to scatter 10 rocks across a particular plane, like a little grid, and I have 10 points on my grid, I want to put those rocks on that grid. Now here's the deal. I want each rock to be just a little bit different. I want each rock to have its own unique look and its own unique flair, right? So this is where you start thinking procedurally. How do I build a rock generator? Well, in Houdini, you would just take these nodes and you box them up into their own little container. And I'll call this rock gen because it's now my rock generator. And you build your own little custom interface. Now, has anybody ever used Mel to build an interface inside of Maya? A custom interface. How was that for you? Was it entertaining and fun? Was it lots of coding and scripting, and I had to make sure that I knew how to call in the menu that I wanted with the slider, then make sure it was placed in the right part of the interface? And so Houdini knows what it is. It's aware of the fact that it is a tool building tool, that it's a machine building tool. It's basically a graphical developer's interface, or a graphical developer machine, right? So this is how I build interfaces in Houdini. I say I want to be able to adjust time, and I want to give it different times so it makes different rocks. Cool. I'm going to grab an integer, and I'm going to drag it over here, and I'm going to call it rocks. And I'm going to say accept. And now I have this new thing called rocks that's a slider, and as I change it, I get new values. Okay, drag and drop interface. I just built my own custom interface. But it's not really doing anything. How do I actually link it up? This is where people begin to think, right, I need to know code so I can script the data from this to be able to link it to the data inside my thing, and I'm not a programmer, and that's why I don't want to do Houdini. Well, don't worry, you don't have to. You can right-click, copy, come in here and say time is what I wanted to change. We sort of saw that when we were playing with our mountain. As I do this, it offsets the noise. Cool. I right-click, paste relative references, it writes the code for you, and it links the two parameters, and now you've got a functioning interface. So here's my interface, and as I change this, I get different rocks. Okay? So now I've built a rock maker. I haven't built one rock. I didn't go in and sculpt the geometry to look like one rock, right? I've got something that will spit out 100 rocks if I want. In fact, I can even take something really cool like, say, the timeline, so the frame number down here, and I can actually use it up here, and as I hit play, I'm just generating 1,000 billion rocks based off the timeline, okay? I could put down an FBX node, export FBX node, and click play, and point it to a folder, and as I click play, it's spitting out rocks just left and right. So I could have 1,000 rocks just as fast as a timeline could play 1,000 frames. So as opposed to the way that you might work in Maya, where you think about building a rock and saving it, in Houdini, you would take that same idea, only think, how could I automate that process? How could I build a machine that makes rocks for me, right? But it's not any different. The actual creation of the geometry the first time around is the same way you do it in Maya. Use the same tools, use the same sculpting tools or poly tools that you want. We've got bevel and chamfer and extrude and everything else that you would think, right? So we've got all of those tools available, but you can actually proceduralize them. You can turn them into elements of a machine based off of a random seed and produce 1,000 objects. It could be cars, it could be trees, it could be rocks, it could be buses, it could be people, it could be anything that you need a bunch of to all look random enough that they look unique, but all look like they came from the same place, from the same forest for a tree, right? So I have like 2 minutes, but I'll show you another thing that this is really handy for. So in this particular case, we used the timeline to create a bunch of rocks as a rock machine and spit them out. But you can also do this like with the terrain. So I have a big giant terrain here of mountains and things, right? And I decided that, hey, I wanted to scatter some points in a particular area. So I just sort of selected that particular area, and I said, yeah, throw some points out there for me, that'd be great. So I've got these points out there, and what I want is I want a rock on every single point. Well, I've already got a rock generator built, so just come over here and grab our rock gen, and we'll copy it out. And I'll do a copy to point. And here's my point, and it asks me, hey, what am I going to copy to? And I plug it in. There it is. It even says as I hover over it, whoop, where's that little red guy pop up? Hey, required target points. Cool, those are the ones that I just scattered all over the place. The next thing it says are, what are the required primitives? Well, that's going to be my rock gen. And I plug it in, and they're tiny because they're rocks, but I get a bunch of little tiny individual unique rocks scattered across my entire terrain. Here's my terrain, and here's my rocks. And I got rocks on my terrain, okay? Now, just the same way that we used $F to randomize those rocks, so we got individual different rocks each time that we had a frame click by, you can use the point number of the scattered points as a seed. You could use the color of the terrain as a seed. So the areas of the terrain that are green get swampy blobs of foliage put on them, and the colors that are brown get rocks and sand put on them. That's because of attributes, because all that point is a little dot in space that holds a bunch of data that we call attributes, and I can use any of those attributes to drive any other attribute. So the ground is green, okay, cool. Use color instead of $F to randomize my rock. So I can pull any piece of data from anything and use it to drive anything else in the scene. I've just hit my 30-minute mark. So I think I'm going to stop there and say, are there any more questions? Because there's a lot more to cover. But we do only have a limited amount of time. So please come up, grab a card, contact me. I would also say there are some videos on Vimeo and also available on SideFX website where I cover Houdini concepts, parts 1 and 2. And we get a little bit deeper into this idea of using point attribute data to drive things, but it's more effects driven. It's less modeling driven and more effects driven, but it really does get into how you can use data from one point to drive another set of data and create a ton of different objects. So definitely check those out. Feel free to come up and grab a card. Questions? I'll open it up for a minute for questions. Yes, sir.
So, this is probably a really extended explanation, but how do I get that factory or that rock builder into Unreal?
Aha.
So that we can actually build rocks.
Yeah, they have, could you ask me again with the mic? I think they're trying to record the question, so, yeah, sorry.
My question is, how do I get that rock builder from Houdini into Unreal so I can build rocks in Unreal?
Gotcha. So the answer is, it's very simple. In fact, I'll try to show you here in the last few minutes. We'll just do a little example, and I'll see if I can get one out. Live demo, cross my fingers, right? Nothing's going to crash. But the idea is that it's not just in Unreal. It can be Unreal, it can be Unity, it can be Cinema 4D, it can be 3D Studio Max, it could be Maya. Up to this point, we have a product called Houdini Engine. An engine works in any of those pieces of software. And the way that it works is, let's go back to where our rock generator is. So this is our, no, it's not my rock gen. Where'd it go? Oh, here's one, my rock maker, okay? If I right-click that and I say Create Digital Asset, it says, awesome, where do you want to save it? So this is the tool that I built that makes rocks, okay? And I just give it a location on disk where I want it to go. Here's my desktop. I'll make a new folder, and we'll call it Demo, and I'm going to call that HDA, by the way, is Houdini Digital Asset.HDA. So I'm going to save that out, and I can just say OK. And it'll take me a little bit to load Unreal. What else could I load really quickly to show this in? Possibly Maya? It's the same process in Unreal as it would be for Unity. I'll try it. Let's see if it loads up in Unity in the next few minutes while we're talking. But once I've saved it out to disk, you literally drop it into your, oh, I know, I borrowed it from the office, from the home office. Once you save it off to disk, you can go into Unity, look inside your assets folder, and literally drag it into the scene. It will ask you for inputs. So there's a little area where you would drag over points if it was a model of a person, if it was points scattered on a rock, whatever that input might be. And the interface looks exactly like Unity's interface, only with the sliders that you created with the drag and drop from Houdini. So it's literally as easy as save it out to disk, drag it into the interface, and Houdini Engine in the background loads all the modules that it needs from Houdini to be able to operate right within the live interface of Unreal, Unity. Okay, well, I didn't expect that. Because I don't have internet in here. Yeah, I was not prepared to do a Houdini Engine demo for you today, but the answer is we have tutorials that will show you exactly how to do that on the SideFX website, and the process is, like I said, you right-click, create digital asset, save it off to disk, load up Unreal. There's a Houdini Engine menu where you can click, find that digital asset, and now it's a piece of a plugin.
That was a process I was thinking about.
Okay.
How do I export that out of Houdini?
Yeah. Yeah, it's literally, you just right-click it and save it as a digital asset, give it a disk location, and then load it back into whatever that other software is. And then, now keep in mind, Houdini Engine is not runtime, Okay? So you're not going to be able to procedurally generate 1 billion rocks as the character runs through the scene. But for digital content creation, as far as like level population, building a level and needing 1,000 rocks in the level, you don't have to build it in Houdini, export it as an FBX, import it into, you just grab the tool that makes walls or rocks or trees and you scatter them and you're good to go.
So can you, it makes 10,000 rocks.
Yeah.
Can you then,
Okay, say you make 10,000 rocks in Unreal. Can you just bake those rocks and then go in and pull some out where you don't want them to be?
Sure. That's
Okay.
exactly how it works.
Okay.
Yeah. You're just creating, it's basically like the same thing as creating them in Houdini, saving them out as an FBX, and then going back and editing the FBX, but you don't have to make that loop. You don't have to make that trip. You're doing it right with the tool right there inside of Unity or Unreal or whatever it might be. Other questions? Yes.
So I'd just like to know, like, since we are spending a lot of time on, creating all these graphs, can we create this as a kind of a library for us? A single tool where, every time we can use that as a default for any objects.
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea, it's the same idea of like digital assets that we were just talking about. If you had a particular graph that was really complicated, you just bundle it up, give a couple of sliders up to the top, and now you've got that as a tool that you just built inside of Houdini. Right. But not just for Houdini, like we were just talking for Maya, for Unreal, for Cinema 4D, for 3D Max, whatever it might be. And if you want a collection of those tools, right. Yeah, then the shelf at the top of the interface, you just drag the tool up to the shelf, and now it sits on the shelf. So if you wanted to build your own shelf, just like you would in Maya, you could build your own shelf and drag scripts, mel scripts, whatever up to it. It's the same idea. You would build it, bundle it up, and then drag it up to the shelf, and now you've got your own custom shelf of tools that you built that you just click a button and it'll lay it in the network, and you're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, guys, we got to wrap up. I think we need to reconfigure the room for a panel, but thank you so much for coming, and feel free to contact me if you need me.